Welcome to another review in my Bob Dylan series. We now find Bob Dylan deep in the 80s. It's 1985, and look at this cover art. It's hard to picture something more 80s looking than this. This album actually seemed to get relatively good critical reviews, but my experience with it is it's Bob Dylan still wanting to make music, but using 80s techniques that didn't necessarily age that well, and not, at least from an obvious standpoint, having anything more particularly interesting to say. This album opens with a song called Tight Connection to My Heart, brackets, Has Anyone Seen My Love? It's a weird song. So again, it emphatically places Dylan in the 80s with its kind of clean synth sound in place of an organ. The drum beats are bigger. There's this weird fake accordion thing that sounds kind of interestingly amelodic, and there's intense backup singing. Despite the fact that Bob Dylan is using all this 80s production, it's not like he's singing simple fun, Madonna, Michael Jackson type songs. He's still writing long, meandery Bob Dylan lyrics, and it gives the impression of him being lost. I feel like the best thing with this song is actually the music video that was made of it, which was directed by Paul Schrader, the screenwriter of Taxi Driver, the writer, director of a great movie from a couple years ago called First Reformed. And like a lot of music videos, it's vague, but I think Paul Schrader does a great job of capturing the lost feeling of the song and mixing a lot of 1980s bright colors with Bob Dylan being disoriented and meeting all these characters who seem to enjoy his music, but with whom he can't quite have that tight connection. Track number 2 is called Seeing the Real You at Last. Now, this one comes off as a cynical track. But as I said in my last review of Infidels, cynical Dylan sounds a lot different than he did when he was younger. Younger Dylan's cynicism was funny, it was cartoonish, it was aggressive, it was in your face. You have a lot of nerve to call yourself my friend. Now it's just a sort of casual, distant cynicism. Again, this meandery, lost feeling that we heard in track 1. Track number 3 is called I'll Remember You. This is a well-produced pop song with a decent bridge, but there's just not anything really in it to make it stand out. Track number 4 is called Clean Cut Kid. I mean, this is Bob Dylan trying to make more of a statement. And at first I listened to it, I thought, okay, it kind of sounds like an 80s version of Bad Bad Leroy Brown. And the lyrics are kind of in the same ballpark as In the Ghetto, but of course, Bob Dylan is not going to have the great emotional delivery of an Elvis Presley. So the first time I heard this, I kind of had a sort of been there, done there reaction to it. That said, because this is Bob Dylan, there are actually a lot of lyrics. And if you take the time to look at them, there's a lot of nuance, because this is not about a kid who was necessarily raised poor and neglected by the state and who thus has a horrible life, as in the Ghetto, nor is he talking about, some kid who seemed to be well treated, but secretly he had a lot of inner darkness, like Simon and Garfunkel's Richard Cory. No, there's something far subtler going on here. It seems to be an indictment of capitalism as a whole, where people look at this kid and they'll say, well, how did he end up failing? And Dylan is saying, well, in a society with no social safety nets, where everything comes down to neoliberalism, how can you expect anyone to succeed? Anything that looks like success is just shallow consumerism, and that can tear your soul apart. I think one of the most telling lines of this song goes, he drank Coca-Cola, he was eating Wonder Bread, he ate Burger King, he was well fed. This song bounces back and forth between pictures of a happy childhood and pictures of this kid not doing well now. But this little part, I can't tell whether Bob Dylan is describing the bright and sunny part of this person's upbringing or the dark part, these being happy things, but also junk food things. And he's almost saying, well, in America, this sort of lousy nutrition is treated as happiness. So you want to know why this seemingly clean-cut kid didn't do so well? Well, because being clean-cut in America looks like this. Track number 5 is called Never Gonna Be the Same Again. This is one where I just found the 80s production to really be too much. Something about the drums and the intensity of the opening just got too loud and kind of hurt my ears for a moment. As for Dylan's contribution to the song, I appreciated the emotion in his vocals. It felt like he was capturing someone who has long trauma-induced trust issues, and he was sort of pleading for someone to stay with him. And so the vocal delivery was compelling. It's just, again, not the most interesting song he's written subject-wise, and the 80s production hit a real low on this one. Track number 6 is called Trust Yourself. I thought the production on this one was a bit better, but the actual song wasn't that great. It felt more like a motivational chant than a full-on melodic performance or an interesting set of lyrics. I guess what's going on with this record is, as I was saying on Infidels, Bob Dylan doesn't have a sort of strong ideological identity. You know, he's not part of the 60s beat movement or the civil rights movement. He's no longer a firm believer in evangelical Christianity. So he's saying the only person you can trust in is yourself. And, you know, that's not the most inspiring worldview. So you get music that kind of sounds like this. Track number 7 is called Emotionally Yours. I'm not sure if there's strings or just kind of like a string-like sound in the background. At some points, there's a cool little cosmic synth and this steady reverby beat. It overall creates this Christmassy feel, which can be a good thing or a not good thing, depending on your mood. So I thought as far as 80s production goes, it was a good version of 80s production. But just, again, the subject matter lacked dramatic tension. You know, the singer is assuring his partner that he is emotionally hers, but it doesn't really sound like this relationship is in doubt. It doesn't sound like there was an interesting argument, an interesting challenge in this relationship. It's just not a compelling song for the listener. Track number 8 is called When Night Comes Falling from the Sky. This felt a little bit like an 80s version of All Along the Watchtower. It's just this dramatic, dynamic scene over a certain amount of chords. Again, though, this is just an interaction between two partners who may or may not have a serious relationship issue. It's hard to really tell. I mean, Dylan tries to turn it up with more symbolic metaphors here. It feels like a kind of meta song where it's saying, you know, maybe life and its dramas are often not interesting, so we have to frame things in these dramatic ways, and we end up doing that, and we exaggerate tensions that maybe aren't that interesting. I don't know. Track number 9 is called Something's Burning, Baby. Like, I feel like Dylan goes out of his way to address all these songs at one person, to have them be these interrelationship conversations, which can be interesting if they're brilliantly written. Like, don't think twice, it's all right. But again, mildly unhappy relationship disputes just don't make for the most fun subject matter. And yeah, this song feels like it's in search of drama, but there's no drama underlying it. Finally, the album ends with a song called Dark Eyes. This is the one song that is not 80s produced. It's acoustic guitar and harmonica, and it has a kind of unique metronomic strumming pattern. I don't love it, but I like that it's trying to do something different. This song also stands out in that it's not being sung from one romantic partner to another, but it does connect to the rest of the album in that it just seems to be about a person who's found themselves growing distant from the rest of the world. There is a line about that French girl who it says has gone up to paradise. So this is a character from Bob Dylan's great song, Stuck Inside a Mobile with the Memphis Blues again. And it's saying, you know, that moment is dead. Now I'm just out here on the street watching lonely, troubled people. So I don't know, when I saw the cover for Empire Burlesque in its lovely 80s tappiness, I wanted to hold out hope. That title invoked maybe just the unapologetic, fun New York aesthetic of like a Huey Lewis and the News, or a New York grittiness of Lou Reed. But it just feels like Bob Dylan with maybe not the most inspired material and trying to make up for that by throwing an 80s gimmick on top of it. And it's just not a great match. I mean, again, Bob Dylan puts so much effort into his lyric writing that even boring Bob Dylan, it's still okay to listen to. It's perfectly good in the background. It's just if you're actually actively listening to it, I would have a hard time falling in love. But again, a lot of critics felt differently than me. And as with a lot of Bob Dylan, I suspect there are people who argue if you listen to the demos versions of these from the bootleg series, maybe they become more interesting songs. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.